Thank you, Shelby. As previously mentioned, the island nation Nauru, nearly 12,000 miles off the Australian coast, is under serious ecological and humanitarian duress. Fearful refugees from Australia's neighboring countries, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, are being shipped off to Nauru and Papua New Guinea. Why now are those aiming for asylum in Australia being averted to such a far-off island? As many of you know, the Pacific Solution, proposed by Prime Minister John Howard of Australia in 2001, was established as a mechanism for defense of Australian borders against refugees seeking asylum. Since the solution has been set in motion, the borders of Nauru have been sealed to the public and any visitors of the refugees. Refugees are treated as prisoners when they arrive in Nauru, for they are sorted into concentration camps and segregated from the locals. While most prefer the depraved conditions rather than the alternative of repatriation and persecution, refugees on Nauru are being stripped of human rights and liberties. Today I appear before all of you not as a citizen of the United States, but as a global citizen of the world we share, and I ask for each one of you to open your ears to the situation in Nauru. The Pacific Solution was a preventative measure made by Australia to seal their borders, but it served as a $20 million payout for Nauru. In an attempt to revitalize the Nauruan economy, the island was made a processing center for asylum seekers awaiting placement into any country that offers space. However, these processing centers act as concentration camps that separate refugees from the Nauruan locals and prohibit refugees from working, leaving the camp or island, and having visitors. In the addition of the 198AB clause in the Migration Act of the Malaysian Solution case in 2013, empowered the Minister of Immigration to appoint specific countries as regional processing centers in order to mediate arrivals by sea. This mediation measure subsequently imposes a loss of rights to oppose visas issued to refugees, which are automatically given by the Australian government, and supply rules and regulations for processing centers. Refugees are subjected to detainment and loss of personal liberties upon arrival. Regulation detailed in Nauruan visas require adequate availability of fresh food, clean water, sufficient clothing, access to medical facilities, and education. However, the reality is much bleaker. Research shows that in 2015, over 800 refugees, 549 men, 134 women, and 119 children were crammed into makeshift tents and shelters where there were 500 people to 8 toilets with minimal privacy. Detained asylum seekers fled countries in terror and are now stuck with the constant fear of death and slowly being driven mad from confinement. While some refugees are allowed to leave confinement for a few hours, they are still forced to remain on the island. Those seeking implementation into Nauruan society or asylum in other countries face either wait times up to 5 years and and they run the risk of being sold into human trafficking, human smuggling. This small nation is at a standstill and forces those inhabitants seeking refuge into a life in limbo, for they are all left with unknown certainty as to whether or not they will die in detainment or be able to restart their lives as planned. Despite Australia's inability to provide hospitable acceptance of asylum seekers fleeing the Middle East, it is essential that conditions of processing centers either be amended or moved to new sustainable locations. By shipping off these individuals to prison-like encampments, the influx of refugees does not get dealt with, but rather it gets pushed outside the public eye. A new identity is inflicted by Nauruan governments and placed on asylum seekers, which distinguishes them as criminals and strips them of all rights to freedom. Asylum is meant to protect those who seek its justice, not destroy their will to live. We now go to Basil Charjour for the final conclusions.